The last broadcast. I've been a late-night radio DJ for nearly a decade, running a small show out of a station on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just me, a microphone, and the occasional call-in from lonely insomniacs or bored truckers. My show, Night Waves, was built for those who needed company in the quiet hours, and I liked the solitude. But one night, that solitude was shattered, leaving scars I'll carry to my grave. It started like any other broadcast. I was midway through a segment about urban legends, spinning a mix of classic rock and eerie tales. The studio lights hummed faintly, and the old turntable crackled as it spun a Fleetwood Mac record. The phone line buzzed. "Night Waves, you're on the air," I answered. A shaky voice came through, trembling with desperation. "Please, you have to help me. I'm trapped." My hand froze over the control panel. Caller's faking distress wasn't unusual, but something in her voice hit me. Raw panic, like she'd been crying for hours. "Miss, slow down. Where are you?" "The old Ashfield Sanitarium," she stammered. I don't know how I got here. Please, it's so dark. They're watching me." My heart thudded. Ashfield Sanitarium had been abandoned for decades. It sat rotting on the outskirts of town, a hulking shell of asbestos-filled walls and shattered windows. Teens broke in on dares. Paranormal investigators filmed there for cheap thrills. But people didn't just end up there. "You're sure it's Ashfield?" I asked, typing it into my laptop to bring up the location. "Yes," she sobbed. "Please come. I can hear them. They're coming back." The line crackled and went dead. I sat there for a moment, staring at the receiver. Was it a prank? A hoax to get me to leave the station? The rational part of me screamed to stay put, but something else, curiosity, maybe even duty, pushed me out the door. I grabbed my flashlight, jacket, and keys. Ashfield Sanitarium loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the cold November sky. The wind howled through broken windows, and the faint scent of mildew and decay filled the air. My car's headlights cut across overgrown weeds and shattered glass as I pulled up to the crumbling entrance. I hesitated, gripping the flashlight tighter. This was stupid. I was stupid. But the girl's voice replayed in my head, her fear palpable. I couldn't just turn back. The flashlight beam swept across the lobby as I stepped inside. The air was colder here, heavy with a dampness that clung to my skin. Peeling wallpaper revealed graffiti tags, and debris littered the floor. Discarded beer cans, crumpled cigarette packs. Typical signs of teenage trespassers. "Hello?" My voice echoed through the empty halls. Silence. I moved deeper into the building, my footsteps crunching against shattered tiles. The place was a maze of corridors, each one darker than the last. My flashlight flickered, and I smacked it against my palm, cursing under my breath. That's when I heard it, the faintest whisper. "Help me!" I froze. The voice was distant, coming from somewhere down the hall. It sounded like the girl from the call. Heart pounding, I followed the sound, my breaths shallow. The corridors twisted and turned, each step pulling me further from the entrance. "Where are you?" I called out. The whisper grew louder, more urgent. "This way. Hurry." I turned a corner and stopped dead. A set of rusted double doors stood ajar, the faded letters above them spelling rec room. The sound was coming from inside. Pushing the doors open, I stepped into a cavernous space. Broken furniture and dust-covered equipment was scattered across the floor. At the far end, a shadow moved. A girl, hunched and trembling. Her long hair obscured her face, and she wore a tattered hospital gown. "I'm here to help," I said, keeping my distance. "Are you hurt?" She didn't respond, just rocked back and forth, whispering something under her breath. As I moved closer, my flashlight flickered again. The beam landed on her hands. They were caked in something dark. Blood. "Miss..." She stopped rocking. Slowly she raised her head, and I saw her face. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and sunken. But the worst was her mouth, stretched into a wide, unnatural grin that didn't match the terror in her eyes. "They're behind you," she whispered. A chill ran down my spine. I turned, and the doors slammed shut behind me. The room plunged into darkness, and I was surrounded by whispers. They came from every corner, growing louder, overlapping, chaotic. "You shouldn't have come. Join us. Stay forever." The flashlight flickered, and I saw them. Shadows crawling across the walls, their limbs unnaturally long, their faces blurred and distorted. I stumbled back, the girl's laughter echoing in my ears. "You can't leave," she said. "You're one of us now." I bolted for the doors, but they wouldn't budge. The shadows closed in, their whispers drilling into my skull. My pulse roared as I fumbled for anything to fight them off. My flashlight clattered to the floor, and darkness swallowed me. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, the room was empty. The girl was gone, and the shadows had retreated. Dazed, I stumbled through the halls, eventually finding my way back to the lobby. My car was still parked outside, and dawn was breaking on the horizon. I didn't go back to the station that night, or the night after. Night waves went silent, and I never told anyone what happened at Ashfield. But the nightmares haven't stopped. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers in the static. The Forest of Faces. I've always loved hiking. The solitude of the woods, the fresh air, the sense of escape. It's the perfect way to clear your head. So when my best friends, Luke and Amanda, suggested a weekend hike in the remote Green Hollow Forest, I didn't hesitate to agree. It was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to disconnect from our daily grind. None of us had any idea what we were walking into. We arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already dipping low behind the thick canopy of evergreens. The trail was overgrown, barely visible in some places, but Luke had a map he insisted was foolproof. "It's supposed to lead to this old ranger station," he said, unfolding the weathered paper. "We can set up camp there for the night." The trail started off peaceful enough, chirping birds, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. But as we ventured deeper, the forest began to change. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, and an unnatural silence settled around us. Even the birds stopped singing. "Does it feel off to you guys?" Amanda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke shrugged. "Just the isolation. We're probably the first people to hike this trail in years." I didn't say anything, but my gut was telling me otherwise. Something about the place felt wrong. We found the first tree as the sun was setting. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary oak, its bark weathered and rough. But as we got closer, we saw the face. It was carved into the trunk, so detailed it looked almost real. Every wrinkle, every pore, even the strands of hair were meticulously etched. The eyes were the worst, though. They seemed to follow us as we moved. "Whoa!" Luke said, running his hand over the bark. "This is incredible. It must have taken someone ages to carve." Amanda shuddered. "Why would anyone do this? It's creepy." I nodded in agreement. There was something unsettling about it, like the face was frozen in mid-scream. I glanced around and noticed another tree with a similar face, and then another. The further we walked, the more faces we found, each one more grotesque than the last. "They're everywhere," Amanda whispered, clutching her jacket. "This isn't normal." Luke, ever the skeptic, laughed. "Maybe it's an art project. You know, some eccentric artist with too much time on their hands." But deep down, even he didn't sound convinced. By the time we reached the clearing where the ranger station was supposed to be, the sun had disappeared, leaving us in near darkness. The station was little more than a dilapidated shack, its roof caved in and windows shattered. We decided to set up our tents nearby, too exhausted to hike back in the dark. As we prepared camp, the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind. But the sound was too deliberate, too human. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable, pleading voices, overlapping and desperate. "Help us! Please, help us!" "Did you hear that?" Amanda asked, her eyes wide. Luke froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "It's just the wind." But we all knew it wasn't. The whispers grew louder, and when I turned, I saw them. The faces on the trees were moving. Their eyes blinked, their mouths opened and closed, mouthing words we couldn't understand. "What the hell is this?" Luke muttered, backing away. One of the faces, an elderly woman with hollow eyes, turned to me. Her lips moved, and this time, the whisper was clear. "Run, before it finds you." "Before what finds us?" I whispered back, my voice shaking. Her face contorted into an expression of pure terror. "The Keeper. It controls us. It will control you." Suddenly, the forest erupted into chaos. The whispers turned into screams, the faces writhing and twisting in agony. The ground beneath us shook, and the shadows between the trees seemed to come alive. "We need to go!" Amanda screamed, grabbing my arm. We bolted, leaving our gear behind. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing denser, their gnarled branches clawing at our clothes and skin. The whispers followed, growing louder and more frantic. "This way!" Luke shouted. But the map was useless now. Every direction looked the same, and the faces were everywhere, their eyes filled with despair. Then we saw it, the Keeper. It emerged from the darkness like a living shadow, its form constantly shifting. It was massive, towering over the trees. Its face, an amalgamation of the ones carved into the bark. Dozens of mouths opened and closed across its surface, emitting a low, guttural growl. It moved with an unnatural grace, sliding between the trees as if it were part of the forest itself. When it turned its many eyes toward us, I felt a cold so deep it froze me in place. "Run!" Amanda screamed again, but I couldn't move. The Keeper raised one of its shadowy limbs, and I felt an invisible force grip my chest, pulling me toward it. "No!" Luke lunged at me, breaking the spell. We ran blindly, the Keeper's growls echoing behind us. The trees seemed to shift, their faces twisted in terror as they watched us flee. We stumbled out of the forest just as dawn broke. The Keeper didn't follow us into the light, but its presence lingered, a weight pressing down on our souls. We didn't speak as we climbed into the car and drove away, leaving the forest and its horrors behind. None of us have talked about it since, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the whispers again, and I know the Keeper is still out there waiting. The forgotten elevator. Working late at Ridgeway Tower was nothing new for me. My boss, Mr. Anders, loved dumping last-minute reports on my desk, and I was too new to the company to push back. That's how I found myself in the empty office. The hum of fluorescent lights my only company, as I clicked through spreadsheets at midnight. The city skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 23rd floor. The view might have been spectacular if I hadn't been so exhausted. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, and the silence of the office was unsettling. Even the cleaning staff had finished for the night. I hit save for what felt like the 1000th time and leaned back in my chair, stretching. That's when I heard it. A low ding, the sound of an elevator arriving. I frowned. At this hour, no one should have been using the elevators. The building security team was strict about employees staying late. Only 1 or 2 guards remained on duty after 10 p.m. Curious, and a little annoyed at the thought of someone still working as late as me, I grabbed my coffee mug and wandered toward the sound. The elevator was at the far end of the hallway, but as I approached, something felt off. The usual bank of 4 elevators was dark, their display panels lifeless. But to their right, where I was sure there had been only a wall earlier, stood a 5th elevator. Its doors were polished steel, gleaming unnaturally in the dim light, and above it, an old-fashioned analog display read B1 in glowing red letters. I stared at it, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. I worked this floor every day. There were 4 elevators, always 4, yet here was a 5th, as real and solid as the mug in my hand. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh. Inside was nothing remarkable, just an elevator, albeit one with a worn red carpet and brass railings that looked decades out of place compared to the modern aesthetic of Ridgeway Tower. I should have walked away. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was an old service elevator they'd reopened. Maybe security was testing something. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The doors closed behind me with a hiss, and the display lit up. 23. I pressed the one button to take me to the lobby, ready to forget the weirdness and head home. But instead of descending, the elevator jolted upward, and the display flashed 24. What the hell? I muttered. The building only had 23 floors. The elevator stopped with a jarring lurch. The doors slid open, and I stared into darkness. A faint, flickering light revealed what looked like an office floor, but it wasn't any floor I recognized. The cubicles were overturned, papers scattered everywhere, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, like blood. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky. No response. I hesitated, then stepped forward, poking my head out of the elevator. My heart thudded in my chest as I noticed red stains smeared across the walls, leading toward a large conference room at the end of the hall. Against my better judgment, I inched forward, drawn by the strange, muffled sounds coming from the room. As I reached the door, I froze. The glass was splattered with more of the red substance, and inside shadows moved. Figures hunched over the conference table, their movements jerky and unnatural. The light flickered, revealing what looked like people? No, not people. Their skin was pale and rubbery, their mouths unnaturally wide as they chewed on. I stumbled back, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. They were eating someone. My gasp must have been louder than I thought because one of them turned, its hollow eyes locking onto me. Its jaw unhinged with an inhuman screech, and the others followed, their heads snapping in my direction. I ran. The elevator doors were still open, and I dove inside, slamming the closed door button repeatedly. The creatures reached the doors just as they slid shut, their clawed hands scraping against the steel. My breath came in ragged gasps as the elevator began to move again. The display flickered. B2. "What is happening?" I whispered to no one. This time, the elevator descended. When it stopped, the doors opened to reveal a different scene. I was looking into what appeared to be a basement, lit by dim, buzzing fluorescence. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, and a low, rhythmic sound echoed through the space, like someone dragging a heavy object across the floor. I stayed inside the elevator, not wanting to repeat my mistake, but something caught my eye. A figure, pale and gaunt, was moving between the cabinets, pulling something behind it. A body bag. I slapped the one button again, but the elevator didn't move. The figure stopped and turned toward me, its face featureless except for two deep, empty sockets where its eyes should have been. It dropped the body bag and began to shuffle toward the elevator. "Move, damn it!" I shouted, punching every button on the panel. The elevator finally jolted upward, the doors closing just as the figure reached them. I sank to the floor, trembling. I didn't know where it was taking me next, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. The display blinked erratically before landing on 00. The doors opened once more, and this time I didn't see a room or a hallway. It was nothing. A void of pitch-black darkness stretched before me, endless and oppressive. Cold air seeped into the elevator, carrying whispers that sounded like my name. "Sarah! Sarah!" My throat tightened. No, 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 no. The darkness shifted, forming shapes, faces, familiar ones. My co-workers, Mr. Anders, even my mom. They stared at me from the void, their mouths moving silently, their eyes filled with sorrow. And then a hand reached through. It was grey and skeletal, its fingers impossibly long. It grasped the edge of the elevator door and began to pull itself inside. I screamed, kicking at the panel, desperately trying to make the elevator move. The display flickered again, and this time it read, "Home." The doors slammed shut, severing the hand at the wrist. The elevator dropped, faster than any elevator should, the force pinning me to the floor. Just as I thought it would crash, it stopped abruptly. The doors opened to the lobby. I didn't question it. I bolted out, not even glancing back. The night guard at the desk looked up, startled. "You okay, miss?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer. I ran out into the night, vowing never to set foot in Ridgeway Tower again. A week later, I quit my job. I couldn't bring myself to return, not even to clear out my desk. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the soft ding of that forgotten elevator, echoing in my dreams. The silent lighthouse. There's something eerie about lighthouses. Maybe it's the isolation or the endless expanse of water they overlook. But when my friends and I decided to visit the old Weatherby Point lighthouse, I wasn't expecting the kind of terror we'd encounter. If I had known what waited for us, I would have stayed far, far away. It was Taylor's idea. He had a knack for finding abandoned places. The weirder, the better. Taylor was the group's self-appointed adventurer, always dragging the rest of us, Liam, Rachel and me, into his schemes. When he found out about Weatherby Point, he wouldn't shut up about it. "It's been abandoned for decades," Taylor said, his grin infectious. "They say the keeper vanished without a trace. Nobody's been able to live there since. Perfect road trip material, right?" Rachel rolled her eyes, but didn't protest. Liam just shrugged. I hesitated. Something about the place made my skin crawl. But in the end, I caved. It was supposed to be harmless fun. The lighthouse sat on a jagged cliff, overlooking the cold Atlantic. The path leading to it was overgrown with weeds, and the salty wind carried a bitter chill. As we approached, the structure loomed above us, its paint peeling and windows dark. The beacon at the top was still, its lens cloudy from years of neglect. "Creepy," Rachel muttered, pulling her jacket tighter. Taylor grinned. "Creepy's the point." We pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. The interior was as decayed as the outside, rotting wood, rusted metal, and layers of dust that clung to every surface. An old spiral staircase wound its way up to the top. "I'll check upstairs," Taylor said, already heading for the stairs. "You guys look around down here." Liam, Rachel, and I exchanged uneasy glances but split up. I wandered into what must have been the keeper's quarters. A small room with a broken bed frame, a desk, and a bookshelf. Most of the books were swollen with moisture, their covers warped and pages stuck together. But one stood out, a leather-bound journal, its spine intact. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle beneath my fingers. The handwriting inside was cramped and uneven, as if the writer had been in a hurry or terrified. April 14th, 1911. The light must not go out. They wait in the dark. I hear them when the waves crash. They speak in whispers I cannot understand, but I feel their intent. The beacon keeps them at bay. If it fails, April 20th, 1911. The storm is relentless. I fear the light will falter. Last night I saw them, shapes moving in the water, eyes reflecting the beam. They are closer now, watching, waiting. "Hey, you okay?" Rachel's voice startled me, and I nearly dropped the journal. "Look at this," I said, showing her the pages. She frowned as she read, the colour draining from her face. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Who knows, but it's unsettling." Before we could say more, a loud clang echoed from above. Taylor shouted, "Guys, come up here, you've got to see this!" Rachel and I exchanged a worried glance but followed the spiral staircase to the lantern room. Liam was already there, looking pale. Taylor stood by the beacon, holding a strange device, a metallic box covered in dials and switches. "Found this in a compartment," Taylor said, grinning like a kid with a new toy. "Looks like it was part of the light system." "Put it back," Liam said sharply. "This place gives me the creeps." "Oh, come on," Taylor scoffed. "It's just old junk." As they argued, I noticed something strange. The beacon's lens. It was spotless now, its glass clear and gleaming. That wasn't how it looked when we arrived. "Did you clean this?" I asked. Taylor shook his head. "It was like that when I got here." A low hum filled the room, and the air seemed to grow heavier. The beacon flickered, then roared to life, casting a piercing beam of light out into the ocean. We all froze. "Why is it on?" Rachel whispered. "No idea," Taylor said, stepping back. "It shouldn't even have power." The hum grew louder, almost vibrating in our bones. I looked out the window, following the beam as it cut through the darkness. That's when I saw them. Shapes in the water, just like the journal described. Dozens of them, their forms shifting and writhing. And their eyes. Their eyes glowed with a sickly green light, reflecting the beacon. "Do you see that?" I stammered. Liam nodded, his face ashen. "We need to leave. Now." Taylor, ever the skeptic, leaned closer to the glass. "They're just waves or something." The shapes moved closer, their outlines becoming clearer. They were humanoid but wrong. Elongated limbs, distorted faces, and skin that shimmered like fish scales. One of them reached the rocks below, pulling itself onto the shore with webbed hands. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Run!" Rachel screamed. We bolted down the staircase, the metallic box forgotten. The lighthouse groaned, its walls vibrating as the hum grew deafening. Outside, the wind howled and the waves crashed violently against the cliffs. The air reeked of salt and decay. As we reached the ground floor, the front door slammed shut on its own. We pushed and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were covered in a thick, oily film, blocking any escape. "They're coming," Liam said, his voice shaking. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow slithering across the wall. It wasn't ours. The whispers began, faint at first, but growing louder. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but the malice was unmistakable. "Upstairs," Taylor said. "We can barricade ourselves in the lantern room." Reluctantly, we followed, dragging anything we could to block the door. The hum was unbearable now, and the light from the beacon pulsed erratically. Outside, the creatures gathered at the base of the lighthouse, their glowing eyes fixed on us. "They want us to turn it off," Rachel said, clutching the journal. "That's what the keeper wrote. They're afraid of the light." Taylor grabbed the metallic box and fiddled with the dials. "If I can boost the signal, maybe..." Before he could finish, a loud crack echoed through the room. The beacon shattered, plunging us into darkness. The whispers erupted into a deafening roar as the creatures surged forward. The last thing I remember is their eyes, glowing in the dark. When I woke up, it was daylight. The others were gone, and the lighthouse was silent. The journal was open beside me, its final entry smeared with blood. May 2nd, 1911. "The light is out. They are here. I don't know how I survived, but I'll never go back. And if you're listening, stay far away from Weatherby Point. The light may be gone, but they're still out there, waiting." The Watchers. I never thought I'd end up living in a cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't part of the plan. Nothing about the last year was. After losing my job and going through a messy breakup, I needed a fresh start. And when my old college friend Andy offered me the use of his late grandfather's cabin, I accepted without hesitation. The cabin was tucked away in a dense forest upstate, about an hour's drive from the nearest town. It was a simple structure. 1 bedroom, a wood-burning stove, and just enough solar power to keep the lights on. Andy warned me it might feel isolating, but I welcomed the solitude. At least that's what I told myself. I moved in at the start of November. By mid-December, the snow was falling thick and fast, blanketing the forest in silence. Nights were long, and the dark came early. That's when things started to change. It was just little things at first, things I could explain away. A tapping sound on the windows late at night, even though the wind was still. Shadows that seemed to shift in the trees when I stepped out to fetch firewood. The sensation of being watched, prickling the back of my neck whenever I walked the narrow path leading to the road. One night, as I was chopping wood, I heard a sound that froze me in place. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the distant call of an owl. It was laughter, soft, childlike, and coming from deep in the woods. I strained my ears, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, closer. I grabbed the axe and retreated inside, bolting the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. A few days later, I woke up to find strange markings in the snow outside the cabin. At first glance, they looked like animal tracks, but they weren't quite right. They were too long, almost human, but with claws at the ends of each toe. The tracks circled the cabin, stopping just beneath the windows. as if whatever made them had been watching me while I slept. I followed the trail as far as I dared, but it disappeared into the dense forest. That night, I locked the doors and windows and kept the axe by my bed. The night before Christmas, the forest was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no distant howls, just silence so deep it felt oppressive. I was reading by the fire when I heard a soft knock at the door. At first I thought it might be Andy, though he hadn't mentioned visiting. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Just the dark, snow-covered forest, stretching endlessly in every direction. Then I saw them. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the porch light, were figures. There were 3, maybe 4 of them, their forms partially obscured by the trees. They were tall and thin, their skin pale and grey, blending almost perfectly with the snow. Their heads were unnaturally large, with wide reflective eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. They didn't move. They just stood there watching. I slammed the door and bolted it, my heart hammering in my chest. The tapping started an hour later. At first it was soft, barely audible over the crackle of the fire, but it grew louder, more insistent, coming from every window at once. I turned off the lights, hoping they wouldn't see me, but the tapping didn't stop. "Go away!" I shouted, gripping the axe tightly. The tapping paused for a moment, and then I heard the laughter again, soft, childlike, and mocking. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, and grabbed the axe. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer. I crept toward the door, every nerve in my body on edge. When I reached the doorway, I stopped, staring out into the dark. The clearing was empty, the snow untouched. But as I turned to shut the door, I saw it, just for a split second, reflected in the glass. A face pressed against the window. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched too tightly over its skull. Its eyes were enormous, black and glistening, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't know how I made it through the rest of that night. By dawn, the figures were gone, and the forest seemed normal again. But I knew I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things as quickly as I could and loaded them into the car. The cabin seemed to watch me as I drove away, its dark windows like eyes glaring out at the forest. As I reached the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Standing at the edge of the trees were the figures, their pale faces tilted slightly, as if they were saying goodbye. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't look back. It's been weeks since I left the cabin, but I can't shake the feeling that they followed me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the tapping on my apartment windows, even though I live on the 4th floor. I've stopped looking out the windows at night. I'm afraid of what I'll see. The Haunting at Half Moon Inn. Snowstorms are merciless in the mountains. When I saw the clouds darken and the first flakes begin to fall, I knew I had to find shelter quickly. My car's tires had already begun to slip on the icy road, and the visibility was nearly zero. When a sign appeared out of the blizzard, my relief was immediate. "Half Moon Inn warm beds and hot meals," the sign read, its letters faintly illuminated by a dim lantern. It felt like salvation. The inn was an old, creaky building perched precariously on the side of the mountain, its windows glowing faintly through the storm. I parked my car as best I could in the snow-covered lot and trudged to the entrance, my boots crunching with each step. By the time I reached the heavy wooden door, my fingers were numb and my breath came out in ragged puffs. Inside, the warmth was immediate, though the air carried a peculiar stillness. The lobby was quaint, with a roaring fireplace and mismatched furniture. A bell sat on the front desk, and I rang it, the sound echoing through the empty space. Moments later, a tall, thin man appeared from a back room. His face was pale and gaunt, his smile stretched too wide. "Welcome to the Half Moon Inn," he said in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "You'll be needing a room, I presume?" "Yes," I said, my voice shaky from the cold. "The storm's getting worse, and I don't think I can drive any farther tonight." "Of course," he replied, his smile unwavering. "We're always happy to accommodate weary travellers." The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Graves, led me to a room on the second floor. The narrow staircase groaned beneath our feet, and the hallways were dimly lit by flickering sconces. My room was small but clean, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the storm. "If you need anything, just ring the bell by the door," Mr. Graves said, gesturing to a small brass bell on the nightstand. "Dinner will be served in the dining room at 7 p.m. sharp." I thanked him and dropped my bag on the bed. Exhaustion tugged at me, but there was something odd about the inn. It wasn't just the creaking floors or the faint smell of mildew. It was the silence. Even with the storm raging outside, the building felt unnaturally quiet, as if it were holding its breath. When I made my way to the dining room that evening, the unease deepened. The long table was set for at least 12 people, yet only a few guests sat scattered among the chairs. An older couple whispered to each other at one end, while a middle-aged man in a suit stared blankly at his plate. Across from me, a young woman with dark hair and hollow eyes poked at her food without eating. Mr. Graves appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, and placed a steaming plate of roast chicken and vegetables in front of me. "Enjoy," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. As I ate, I tried to strike up a conversation with the woman across from me. "Crazy storm, huh?" She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "It always snows here," she said, her voice barely audible. Before I could respond, she stood and left the room, her footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The other guests weren't any more talkative. The older couple avoided eye contact, and the man in the suit never moved. I finished my meal quickly, the oppressive atmosphere driving me back to my room. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it was another guest, but the steps didn't fade away. They stopped right outside my door. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer. Just the sound of the brass bell on my nightstand ringing softly, though I hadn't touched it. Heart pounding, I got out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the air felt colder, as if the storm had seeped inside. I shut the door quickly and locked it, my unease growing into fear. The next morning, I decided to leave. The storm had lessened, and I was desperate to put distance between myself and the inn. But when I reached the front desk to check out, Mr. Graves was nowhere to be found. Instead, the young woman from dinner stood there, her expression grim. "You can't leave," she said, her voice flat. "What do you mean?" I asked, anger masking my fear. She didn't answer, just pointed to the front door. I turned to look and froze. Beyond the glass, the storm was still raging, the snow piling higher than I'd ever seen. But that wasn't the worst part. Figures stood just outside, dozens of them, their faces pressed to the glass. Their eyes were black voids and their mouths were twisted into grotesque smiles. "They won't let you go," the woman whispered. "None of us can leave." I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. "What are you talking about? Who are they?" "The others," she said. "The ones who stayed before us. The ones who never left." Desperate for answers, I confronted Mr. Graves that evening. He was in the dining room, calmly polishing silverware as if nothing was wrong. "Let me leave," I demanded, slamming my fist on the table. "This place is wrong. I don't care about the storm. I just want to go." He looked up at me with that same unnerving smile. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, the Half Moon Inn requires its guests to stay permanently." "What does that mean?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty room. "It means," he said, his tone as calm as ever, "that you are now part of our family, just like the others." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran from the room, up the stairs and back to my own. But when I flung open the door, it wasn't my room anymore. It was the dining room again, with the same table, the same guests, and Mr. Graves standing at the head, his smile wider than ever. "Welcome back," he said. "I don't know how long I've been here now. Days? Months? Time doesn't seem to exist at the Half Moon Inn. The guests never change, and neither does the storm outside. I've stopped trying to leave. The front door is always locked, and the figures in the snow are always watching. Sometimes I hear the bell ring in the middle of the night, followed by footsteps in the hallway. I used to check, but I know better now. It's just another guest arriving. Another weary traveller who'll soon learn the truth. If you ever see the sign for the Half Moon Inn, keep driving. No matter how tired you are or how bad the weather gets, don't stop, because once you check in, you'll never leave." The Mirror House. They say memories are like ghosts, silent, lingering things that haunt us whether we like it or not. I used to think that was just poetic nonsense until I spent the night in my late grandmother's house. What started as a favour turned into something that clawed its way into my mind. A story I've spent every day since trying to forget. I'm writing this now because I can't trust myself anymore. If I don't put this down somewhere, I'll start to believe it was all in my head. Maybe it was. But when I close my eyes, I can still see it. The mirrors, the faces, and the endless hollow silence. It began with my sister, Clara. She'd been handling most of the arrangements since Grandma passed. I'd stayed out of it. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't stand that house. Even as a kid, there was something about it that unsettled me. It wasn't the house itself. It was what Grandma called her collection. Every wall in her home was covered in mirrors. Big ones, small ones, ornate ones with gold leaf frames, and simple ones with cracked edges. Every room had them, even the bathrooms and the narrow, creaking hallways. Some were antiques she'd picked up at estate sales. Others were gifts. She always said they were her windows into other worlds. As a kid, I thought it was charming, maybe a little eccentric. But as I got older, I started to notice the way she'd avoid looking at them directly, like she was afraid of what might look back. So when Clara called me, practically begging for help with the estate, I hesitated. "I can't do it all alone," she said. "Just one night. Please, Sam." I reluctantly agreed. It felt wrong to let her shoulder the burden entirely. Grandma's funeral had been 2 weeks earlier, and the house needed to be cleared out before the bank took it. Clara had already done most of the work, sorting through the furniture, packing up the kitchen, and sifting through the endless boxes of trinkets Grandma had hoarded over the years. All that was left were the mirrors. I arrived just before sunset. The house looked the same as it always had, a sagging Victorian with peeling paint and ivy choking the walls. Clara's car wasn't in the driveway, but the front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the smell of mothballs and wood polish. The mirrors greeted me immediately. The entryway alone had 6 of them, all different shapes and sizes, their glass faces catching the dim light and throwing distorted reflections back at me. I hated it already. "Clara?" I called out, my voice echoing faintly. No response. I wandered through the house, my footsteps creaking on the warped floorboards. Every room felt suffocating, the mirrors multiplying my unease. They weren't just on the walls. They were propped on tables, leaned against corners, and even hung from the ceilings. It felt like they were watching me. I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Clara's rushed scrawl. "Sam, I had to run back to town to grab a few things. Be back by 9. Start packing up the mirrors in the den if you're feeling brave. Thanks for doing this, Clara." Great. That gave me a couple of hours alone in the creepiest house I'd ever known. I considered waiting for her in the car, but the thought of her coming back to find me hiding like a child embarrassed me. So I grabbed a roll of packing tape and some bubble wrap from the pile she'd left and headed to the den. The den was the worst room in the house. Grandma had crammed it full of mirrors, covering every inch of the walls. Even the windows had been replaced with glass panels framed like mirrors, so the fading daylight fractured and refracted until the room glowed with a cold silvery light. I started with the smallest ones, carefully wrapping them and stacking them in boxes. With every mirror I packed, the room grew darker, the shadows stretching and twisting. I tried not to look directly at the glass as I worked, but it was impossible not to catch glimpses of my own reflection. And something about those glimpses made my skin crawl. It wasn't that the reflections were wrong exactly. They just felt off, like the angle of my head was slightly different, or my eyes lingered a fraction too long after I'd looked away. By the time I reached the largest mirror, a towering antique with a frame carved to look like twisting vines, the light was almost gone. I'd left the overhead light off. The thought of seeing every reflection at once was too much to bear. Instead, I worked by the dim glow of the hallway light, my shadow stretching long and thin across the walls. As I wrapped the base of the mirror, I felt a chill creep up my spine. I stopped, listening. The house was silent, but it was a charged silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I turned toward the door, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing there, a pale shape with hollow eyes. I spun around, heart pounding, but the doorway was empty. My own reflection stared back at me from the mirror, wide-eyed and trembling. "Get a grip," I muttered, my voice sounding small and weak. It was just my imagination. I was alone in the house. I had to be. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Clara didn't come back at 9. By 10:30, I was pacing the living room, my phone clutched in my hand. I'd called her 3 times, but it went straight to voicemail every time. I tried to convince myself that her errands had just taken longer than expected. But my anxiety was spiraling. The house felt alive around me, the mirrors swallowing the weak light and throwing warped shadows across the walls. I decided to leave. Clara could deal with the mirrors herself. As I headed toward the front door, something caught my eye. One of the mirrors in the hallway, a long, narrow one with a tarnished silver frame, was reflecting something that shouldn't have been there. In the glass, the hallway stretched on and on, far beyond the point where the wall should have been. At the end of the impossibly long corridor stood a figure, barely visible in the dim light. It was turned away from me, its head bowed, its shoulders hunched. I froze, my hand gripping the doorknob. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Slowly, I turned to look down the hallway. The wall was there, solid and unbroken. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure had moved closer. I ran. I didn't stop to think, didn't stop to grab my coat or keys. I just bolted out the door and into the freezing night. My car was parked at the end of the driveway, and I didn't dare look back as I sprinted toward it. But when I reached the car, the keys weren't in my pocket. They were still in the house. For a moment, I considered leaving anyway, running to the neighbors, or even all the way to town. But the thought of Clara coming back to find the house unlocked stopped me. I couldn't leave her alone with whatever was in there. Cursing under my breath, I crept back toward the house. The windows were dark, and the door stood open, yawning like a black mouth. I stepped inside, the air icy against my skin. The hallway mirror was empty, just a reflection of the walls and floor. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, my own overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew better. I found my keys on the kitchen counter where I'd left them. As I grabbed them, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. One of the smaller mirrors on the wall was shaking, the glass vibrating like something was pressing against it from the other side. And then it shattered. I don't remember running back to the car. I don't remember starting the engine or tearing out of the driveway. The next thing I knew, I was on the highway. The house a distant smudge in the rearview mirror. Clara never came back. The police found her car abandoned in a grocery store parking lot, her purse and phone still inside. They searched the house but found nothing unusual. Nothing except the mirrors. I've tried to move on, but I can't. Every time I see my reflection, I'm afraid it will move when I don't. I've covered every mirror in my apartment, but it doesn't help. At night, I hear them whispering, their voices cold and hollow, calling me back to the house. I'm not going back. I can't. But sometimes, in the dark, I catch glimpses of something in the glass. A pale shape with hollow eyes, waiting just beyond the surface, waiting for me. You made it through the darkness. Bloody subscribe for more chills and have a hauntingly good night.